All right, good morning, everybody. We are back once again and ready to get started on the second half of our Contractors Bootcamp 2021. I'd like to introduce to you Camillo Prandini. Camillo has worked for the state of California for over 25 years. For the last 19 years, I guess it would be. He would work for Caltrans Central Region Construction. 2008, he became the Labor Compliance Manager for Caltrans Central Region. Camillo's experience includes managing a 20-county region in the areas of prevailing wages, fair subcontracting, equal employment opportunity, disadvantaged business enterprise, disabled veteran business enterprise, and small business statutory and regulatory compliance. In 2014, Camillo was the acting Labor Compliance Program Manager and Office Chief for the Office of Construction Support in Sacramento. And in addition to labor compliance, Camillo also managed the Central Region Construction's administration support. And with that, I'd like to welcome Mr. Camillo Prandini to our boot camp. Camillo, good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting us. We're excited to be here. One of the things that Rob had on his presentation and estimating was labor costs. And this is something that is going to affect all of you as you go through. So just a little background with our program. We are one of 4 approved labor compliance programs in the state of California by Department of Industrial Relations. What that means is basically we have the same enforcement of Department of Industrial Relations and the Labor Commissioner to enforce labor and prevailing wage rates on our projects. With that, we collect certified payrolls on the Caltrans awarding body projects and not Department of Industrial Relations. So those would be sent to us, and Dava will go through that as we go through. I know Rob had said, and I believe some of the other contractors stated that they require their contractors to be union contractors. We do not require, Caltrans does not require contractors to be union contractors. However, we do require all of our contractors to pay prevailing wage. And we'll go over where that could be located in a few minutes. So even if you are not a union contractor or you are an owner operator, you are still required to follow the requirements of the prevailing wage. But more importantly, we are here to help you. We want to help educate you and not do enforcement. Enforcement takes a lot of effort on our part. People are not happy, and we want you to succeed when you are bidding and working on our projects. We want you to have a pleasant experience working for us. So if you have questions, talk to the labor compliance folks before you start your operation, or talk to your general contractor before you start the operation. Let's talk things through before we get into a situation where we have to do enforcement. So with that, I know the agenda says that Colleen Bruno is going to be presenting. We had Colleen out right now. So Dava Overacker, who is one of our leads in labor compliance in Central Region, will be taking over from here, and I'm going to hand it over to Dava.
Thank you, Camillo. I hope you all can hear me. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for having us. It's a delight to be here. And like Camillo said, we would like to help rather than enforce. So please reach out to us if you ever have questions regarding prevailing wage. So I'm going to go through this PowerPoint. I'll stop at each section and ask if there's questions. And then at the end, we'll open up for questions. So this is prevailing wage requirements for construction contracts. So I'm going to go over the labor compliance laws and regulations that are applicable to working on prevailing wage. So these are the specific codes and statutes that apply to prevailing wage. These are what we enforce as a department that works with the direction of DIR. So we have California Labor Code Section 1720 to 1815. There's the California Code of Regulations, Chapter 8, Subchapter 3. This goes over the payment of prevailing wages upon public works. There's also the California Public Contract Code, 4100 to 4114. Then there's the Caltrans Standard Specifications and the Caltrans Special Provisions. The labor codes are, written with legal language. So we get questions about those quite often. So feel free, if you're reading something that doesn't make sense, you need clarification, you can reach out to us. I'm going to go through some of these in more detail. So this is Labor Code section 1720, and this is the section that defines public works. So public works in this section is defined as construction, alteration, demolition, installation, or repair work done under contract and paid for in whole or part out of public funds. So basically any work you do on a job that involves public funds where you're doing any of these things is going to constitute prevailing wage. Of course, there are intricacies about certain aspects of work performed, and if you ever have questions about what might be considered what we call covered work or not covered, you can reach out to labor compliance. Construction includes work performed during the design and pre-construction phases of construction, including but not limited to inspection, land surveying work, and work performed during the pre-construction phases of construction, including but not limited to all cleanup work at the job site. And then installation includes, but is not limited to, the assembly and disassembly of freestanding and affixed modular office systems. So this is probably a pretty broad definition. We tend to say if you're working on a job with Public Works, just assume it's covered. If you have a question, reach out to us and we can provide you more guidance. It's better to be more cautious about it, especially with the prevailing wage requirements. This is Labor Code section 1720.9. It's Assembly Bill 219. So this was approved by Governor Brown on October 10th, 2015. It expands the definition of public works to include the hauling and delivery of ready-mix concrete. So any ready-mix concrete that is delivered on the job site is defined as public works, which we call covered work. It requires the payment of prevailing wage, and the wage rate is defined by the geographic area in which the concrete factory or batch plant is located. So an example would be you're working in San Luis County, but you're picking up concrete in Santa Barbara. I know that's not really feasible, but just for an example, your prevailing wage rate would be Santa Barbara because that is the geographic area in which the concrete factory or batch plant is located. So it's very important that if you're going to do any hauling or delivery of ready-mix concrete, you're aware of those requirements. This bill does require that contractors and subcontractors enter into a written agreement or subcontract. It requires that the entity hauling has to submit payrolls and time records to the prime contractor within 5 working days after the employee has been paid. This is effective for contracts which are awarded on or after July 1st, 2016. So this is Labor Code section 1720.3, Assembly Bill 515. I just want to say I do see a question in the chat. As soon as I'm done with this section, I can answer that question. Okay. 8.3 or Assembly Bill 514. Public works also means the hauling of refuse from public works site to an outside disposal location. So if you've ever worked in public works, we call this off hauling. This assembly bill essentially made almost everything considered covered work if you're off hauling some type of material. And here's the definition that we have from this assembly bill. Hauling of refuse includes, but is not limited to, hauling soil, sand, gravel, rocks, concrete, asphalt, excavation materials, and construction debris. So that's a very broad definition. Most of the time, if we hear you're hauling something off the site, it's most likely going to be covered work. Hauling of refuse shall not include the hauling of recyclable materials such as copper, steel, and aluminum that have been separated from other materials at the job site prior to transportation and that are sold at fair market value to a bona fide purchaser. So the definition for what is not considered covered work for off hauling is very slim. So like we say, most of the time you consider it covered until you hear otherwise. That's just a good way to go. The Department of Industrial Relations public work case is 2016-017, and this is available on the DIR website in case you wanted to read into it further. So then we have Labor Code section 1722.1. For the purposes of this section, contractor and subcontractor includes a contractor, subcontractor, licensee, officer, agent, or representative thereof acting in that capacity when working on public works pursuant to this article. So this means that anybody that's working on a public work site performing any sort of physical work is considered covered. So something we run into quite often is you have a foreman or even the president of a company going out to a job site and picking up a shovel and moving some dirt. That is considered covered work. So that's something to keep in mind. Your status with your company doesn't necessarily negate the public works requirements. Labor Code 1725.5 is the contractor registration labor code. So this labor code talks about your requirement to be registered with the Department of Industrial Relations. All contractors, owner-operators, subcontractors have to be registered with the Department of Industrial Relations as a public works contractor pursuant to this section to be qualified to bid on or be listed in a bid proposal, subject to the requirements of Section 4104 of the Public Contract Code, or engage in the performance of any public work contract that is subject to the requirements of this chapter. Anybody that goes onto a public works job site and performs any covered work is required to be registered with DIR. You can do that on the DIR website. I don't want to get into specifics, but I believe it's $400 the first time you register, and then you register yearly after that. For the purposes of this section, the contractor includes a subcontractor, and the annual registration and fees are paid through the Department of Industrial Relations on or before July 1st of every year. So this is something we check when you start on a job and we get your first payroll and your fringe benefit statement. We're going to look for this number. We have a way to find it, but we also have a section on our fringe benefit statement that you will submit that asks for this information so that we have it. Section is wage determinant and classifications. Before I move on, I just want to see if there's any questions about the labor code specifically.
Okay, so we have one question from Shelly Moreau. And she says, I have been wanting to find an employee who specializes in contracts or labor compliance and prevailing wages, but I am not sure how to write up the job description. Can you offer any tips or know where I could find a template for that position?
That is a really good question. I'm trying to think if there's what's publicly available as far as our positions and my position. I could definitely send you something that might be helpful, that would kind of outline what it is that you might be looking for. If you want to go ahead and my email's in the chat. If you want to go ahead and send me an email, I will definitely follow up with you if that's okay, Shelly. Thank you for the question. That was a good one. I was like, oh, I'm stumped already. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next section. This is wage determination and classifications. So wage determinations, what is a wage determination and how does it apply to prevailing wage requirements? So the wage determinations for a contract are the determinations that is required for the life of the contract. Once the appropriate wage determination has been identified, the contractor should only use the classifications within that determination year. You have to read and follow the footnotes for each classification. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on the following slides. This shows you the Department of Industrial Relations General Prevailing Wage Determinations website. These dates are a little old, but it does say now, I think 2020-2. So this is where you're going to look to find the applicable determinations for where the job is being performed and the time period for which it was bid. So the first two links are the current published rates, and the current bidders generally use these rates for the current advertised projects. For any projects that may have been already bid and awarded, so say you're coming into a project and it's been a year, you are going to click on the superseded prevailing wage determinations and find the superseded determination that would be applicable to your work on that project. There's also a link here at the bottom. That's something that we can go ahead and share with you. But it's on the DIR website. It's very easy to get to. And this is where you're going to find all of your prevailing wage determinations. So for federal wage determinations, these are based on the bid open date of the project. And these are what's published at least 10 days prior to the bid open date. They're in effect for the life of the project. So there's no predetermined wage increases on federal determinations. And they're published with the project advertisement documents. So the actual federal wage determination in entirety is published with the project advertisement documents, which means the prime contractor should have these documents for you if you need them. The federal wage determinations are also available on the beta.sam.gov website, and they're usually based on county and then the type of work that's being done, which is always going to be heavy highway work. So there is always going to be a difference between the state and federal wage determination. So if you pull up the state determination and you're looking for an operating engineer, you're going to look at the federal wage determination and you're going to look for a power equipment operator. And they're going to have two completely different wage rates. So something to keep in mind that you're always required to pay the higher wage rate between the state and federal wage determinations. In most cases, not all, but in most, this is going to be the state rate. There are a few classifications that are sometimes higher on the federal wage determinations, but not very many. So more than likely, you're going to use the state determination for your wages. Okay, so I'm going to go over the prevailing wage requirements. A lot of information. It's the required rates of pay, and this covers all the basics of prevailing wage payments. So contractors and subcontractors performing prevailing wage work must comply with the following. You are required to pay the basic hourly rate to the employee as an hourly wage. So when you pull up that determination, you're going to see a basic hourly rate, and that has to be paid to the employee as an hourly wage. You have to pay the total amounts identified under the employee payments, or we call them fringe benefits, either to an approved plan or program or directly to the employee. So you have their basic hourly rate that you're paying as an hourly wage, and then you have the employer payments or fringe benefits. These need to be paid if you're union to a fund. If you're non-union, you're going to pay these in cash to the employee, not cash, but in their check to the employee. You have to meet the total hourly rate, which is the employee's hourly wage, and the eligible employee payments to meet prevailing wage requirements. Now, in that employer payments section, there is one of the fringe benefits is called a training fee. If the classification is apprenticeable, and you have to make sure that training fee is paid either directly to DIR, the California Apprenticeship Council, or pay it to a DIR approved apprenticeship program, which if you're usually going to be a union fund. It's very important. This is something that we see a lot with contractors that are non-union. They pay all the employer payments to the employee, and then if it's an operating engineer or a laborer, that's an apprenticeable classification. So we have to see that those training fees are being paid to a program that trains for the classification that's being used. So that's something that we look at. And if you ever have questions about that, definitely reach out to us. You're also required to pay the overtime rate for all hours worked over 8 hours in a calendar day and 40 in a calendar week. This is something that also comes up quite a bit for us and will require auditing and things like that. So some contractors work 10-hour days. That is completely fine. You can work 4 10-hour days in a week, but that first 8 hours is straight and the last 2 has to be paid at the overtime rate. This is a requirement for public works. So it doesn't matter if it's standard practice for your company. Anything over 8 hours in a calendar day or 40 in a calendar week has to be paid at the overtime rate. There's also premium rates of pay that are required for any work performed on a Saturday or Sunday, regardless of whether the employee has worked 40 hours in a week. I'm going to put a little caveat here. This really applies to a vast majority of classifications, but there are a few, if you look at the footnotes on the determinations, that allow for, say, a project is shut down because of inclement weather. Sometimes Saturday work can be paid at straight rate of pay or the basic hourly rate, but you just really need to look at those footnotes to determine whether or not those premium rates of pay apply. But like I said, in most cases, they will. You're also required to pay the applicable holiday rate for any hours worked on a day that is recognized as a holiday in accordance with the holiday provisions published for the specific classification. So I'm going to go into more detail, I believe, later about looking at a prevailing wage determination and where to find this information on DIR's website, because it's not exactly super easy. So I'll show you where to find the holiday scope, because not every day that you would think would be a holiday is recognized. So it's important to know where that information is located to ensure that you're paying the applicable holiday rates. You're also required to pay the applicable predetermined increases. So I'll show you how that works. Some state prevailing wage rates do have predetermined increases that take effect during the course of the project, and we need to make sure that those are paid. You're also required to pay applicable compensatory, and then you are required to pay travel per diem. So the travel per diem is located in the travel provisions, which is also where the holiday rate information would be located. I'm hoping that's I believe that's on a following slide, so I can show you where you would find that information. And you're also required to pay applicable shift rates in accordance with the shift provisions published for the specific classifications. Not all classifications have shift rates, but you're going to want to make sure you look for that information for any classification you might be using. Okay, so wage rate predetermined increases. Predetermined increases are available at the time of publication for a wage determination. So this is a thing with the state determinations. If you're going to bid on a project and you want to know what increases there's going to be over the course of work on that project, those increases are available on DIR's website as soon as you go to look for the first determination. So that's helpful on a project that you may be working on for a long period of time, so you can make sure you work that into your bid and your costs. The predetermined increases must be taken into consideration, as the increase is the required rate of pay during the course of the contract. Not all classifications have predetermined increases. If there is no predetermined increase, the classification will indicate no increase, or there will be an asterisk next to the expiration date. I believe I get to show you this on the next screen, so I can give you some examples. If a predetermined increase exists for the classification, there will be a blue link next to the determination that will indicate increase. Predetermined increases may also be identified by a double asterisk symbol located next to the expiration date of the wage determination. So here is an example of looking at, this is the classification of driver on and off haul. So we have the different counties, we have the name of. Then if you look at that column with the little drop downs, it says holidays, scope of work, travel, and subsistence. This is where you're going to find what I was talking about before, the holidays, the shift provisions, and the travel provisions. So anytime you're looking for a determination, make sure you look at each of those drop downs to ensure that you're paying any required holiday, shift, and travel. In this section, you can also find scope of work. So if you wanted to know if some work that a laborer is performing falls within his scope, or maybe would be an operating engineer, that's also going to be in that column. Then on that last column, we have the predetermined increases. So if you see here, there's ones that say no increase. That means there's no increase for the life of the project, which means that determination that you pull up for Glenn, Lassen, Modoc, Plumas, Shasta, Siskiyou, Tehama, and Trinity counties will be in effect for the life of the contract. If there are increases, as you see here with Imperial and San Diego counties, you're going to pull up those increases by clicking on that blue link, and you're going to see when those increases take effect and the exact amount of those increases. If for some reason you pull up that increase and it doesn't give a breakdown, which happens in some cases, it'll say $2 applied to employer payments. That's not clear. We don't know what employer payments that's applied to. You can contact DIR directly, and their email, I believe, is at the bottom of these pages, and they'll give you a breakdown. So if there's ever any questions about increases, what the rates will be, go ahead and reach out to labor compliance. Like I said, like Camilla said, like I said, we want to help more than we want to enforce.
What happens if someone misses a wage increase? What happens if they submit their paperwork and something's not quite right?
Okay, so say you missed an increase, which is very common and very easy to do. We would review the payroll, and if we find an issue, we're going to reach out to you directly. So one of the first steps is we notify the prime contractor on a notice that they received that just says something to the effect of, it appears that an increase was not paid for this classification for this time period. Please submit proof of restitution. So what we require is that you go back and you pay restitution to the affected workers. If you do that and we get proof of that and it's taken care of at the district level, we consider that matter satisfied, and we move on. If we communicate that to the prime and we communicate with you and we don't get a response, or we don't get proof that that restitution that's owed was paid, we will do a wage case, which is an audit. Hopefully we can still resolve it at the district level. If for some reason we can't get it resolved or there's a disagreement, it does get elevated to our headquarters. So we like to solve things at the district level. We prefer it that way. So if you missed an increase, reach out to us and let us know. It's not going to be a big deal. As long as you're communicating with us and you're open with us about those kinds of issues, we're definitely willing to work with you. We just have to see that those employees were paid properly. So it'll be submission of restitution and proof and things like that.
And what does proof look like?
Okay, so that's a good one. So it's different for every company. It really depends on how you pay your employees. So if you pay your employees by a check, a physical check, which isn't as common nowadays, usually it's all direct deposit, but if you pay with a physical check, what I'm going to want to see is I'm going to want to see a revised payroll showing the correct wage rate, because the first payroll you submitted most likely didn't have the increase on it. And then I'm going to want to see two check numbers on that payroll. The first check that you paid them, and then the second check that's the restitution check, which is the payment to them to make up the difference. I'm also going to want to see a copy of the check stub to that employee. On Public Works, you are required to supply check stubs to all employees. I think we go into that a little bit later. And I'm going to want to see a copy of the front and back of the cashed check. So after it goes through the bank, I see the front of the check, and then I want to see the back where the employee would have signed. If you pay by direct deposit, these are always fun because every company is different. You'll probably have to work with us to figure out what exactly we're going to need. Most likely, what we'll need, and contractors hate this, but I have to have proof. We always say we need to see the money move. I need to see it move from the contractor to the employee. So usually I want a direct deposit enrollment form from the employee. You can black out everything except for the last 4 digits of the account number, and then the check stub, because they still have to get a check stub if they're direct deposit. And then usually it's going to be a business banking record that shows that outgoing payment from your business account. You can black out everything else on the page. I just have to see that that net amount paid to that employee matches that restitution that's owed, and I'm satisfied. If you work with a payroll company, we're very familiar with a lot of the payroll companies, so we can definitely help you in asking what to look for. With payroll companies, it's usually a payroll journal or an invoice to the company where you paid that employee. But direct deposit's funky, but we're always here. We're always willing to help and let you know exactly what it is we're needing. So if that comes up, definitely reach out to us, and we'll make sure we get what we need. And just keep in mind, labor code does allow us to ask for these types of documents. The definition of payroll records is very broad. So we're never trying to be intrusive. Like I said, you can black out as much as you want, but we do have to have proof if there's ever an underpayment that these employees were paid. And like I said, we want to take care of it at the district level. So work with us and we'll work with you to get it resolved. So this is an example of the top prevailing wage determination. So we were just looking at the driver on and off haul. If I were to click on the little blue link on that previous slide, it would pull up the whole determination at the 2 asterisks. So the 2 asterisks means there is a predetermined increase that will take effect over the course of the determination. Something to keep in mind too, the expiration date of the determination doesn't always coincide the issue date of the determination. So we see here it's February 22nd, 2016. That doesn't always coincide with the date of the increase. So you want to make sure when you're looking at those increases, you're looking at the date they're effective, not the issue date of the next determination. Just something to keep in mind. You really have to pay attention to those issue dates on those increases. Okay, so that was a lot of information. I don't see any questions in the chat, but I want to give everybody a few moments. If there's any questions, there's anything I can provide more clarification on, please let me know.
There is this one question from Shelley, a follow-up. She says, we often have several prevailing wage jobs going on at the same time. Are there any recommendations of best practices so you aren't having to look up every week?
When you say look it up every week, I'm wondering if you're meaning the determinations or the increases to see if there's going to be an increase. I'm sorry, I'm confused by the question just a little bit. Shelley, if you could provide a little bit of clarification about what you're referring to when you say look it up.
The determinations and the increases.
Okay. So I would suggest, it's hard because I work on this side, not your side. So, but what I can suggest is looking them up at the beginning of the project and then printing your increases. I have a spreadsheet that I keep if I'm doing, say, an audit, where I put in the classifications I'm utilizing, their current rate of pay, and then the dates of the increases. If you're doing it that way, you're going to see increases over a 2-year or so period if there are increases. So you'll have 2 years of information there that you can save. I know usually you have multiple counties, so it's really a preference, but on my wage cases, what I usually do is set up tabs in the bottom of Excel for the counties, and then I'll input the information for the determinations, because you're not using all 20 operating engineers or all 15 operating engineers. You might only be using a few. But unfortunately, there isn't an easy way to do it. It does take time. It is quite tedious, but like I said, if you get that initial determination and get those increases when you pull that, then you have all the information you need for a good period of time. And remember, if there are no increases, you can keep that determination for the life of the contract. So those wages are never going to increase if there were no posted increases when you pulled up that first determination. I hope I answered your question.
From G Trucking, they asked, how do you treat owner operators CEM 2502 forms?
As practice at Caltrans from here forward, this actually started middle of last year, we're no longer accepting owner operator listings. So we're no longer accepting that specific form that you're asking about. What we are suggesting and what we are requiring is that you submit a certified payroll form. So this is, I'm going to be bad right now. I don't remember it off the top of my head. I think it's the 2502, 2503, but it's the certified payroll subcontractor contractor form. You can submit your payroll on that form. You're going to fill it out as if it was a payroll. You're going to show your information, the classification that you were performing work for. You're going to put the hours you worked, and then you're going to put a check number and your hourly rate. You're going to break it down. It's basically very close to the owner operator form. So it shouldn't be that difficult to complete. If you have questions or issues when you're completing the certified payroll form for a project, definitely reach out to the labor compliance officer for that contract, or reach out to me. I can help. But you're going to have to use a certified payroll form and not the owner operator listing. Sorry, I just saw another question, so I'm just going to answer it, Jada. I'm sorry.
No, sure.
Where do you get these forms? So these forms are all available on Caltrans Forms website. I believe there is a link on this presentation. If there is not, I'll definitely get it for you. They're the standard contractor listing, the fringe benefits forms, and they all have form numbers. It's usually CEM 250 something, but they're all on the Caltrans website.
Perfect. And then one last question from Amone Livingston, and asking, concerning holidays, Caltrans has more holidays given to government employees compared to the private industry. For those holidays that are not taken by private firms, how is this handled with paying prevailing wage to the employees working on Caltrans projects?
You're always going to refer to the prevailing wage determinations drop-down menu for holidays and how to pay them. The holidays that Caltrans takes as an agency are not going to be the same holidays that are afforded to employees working on public works. A lot of times they do align, but every single classification is different. So on that previous slide where I showed you where those drop downs were located, for any classification you're using, you're going to want to go into that drop down. You're going to pull up the holiday, and you're going to see there what holidays are required to be paid for that specific classification. And it usually tells you what rate you're going to pay for those holidays. So you always want to refer back to that. Just because Caltrans takes a day off doesn't necessarily mean a Caltrans employee, so the resident engineer, the inspector, doesn't mean that the people working on the job are necessarily required to be paid holiday pay. So you have to make sure you're referring to those holiday provisions on the DIR website. So this goes over the payroll requirements, what payroll documents actually have to be submitted to us. This is the forms I was speaking of that I didn't know the numbers of, which is shame on me. The following certified weekly payroll records are required. Fringe benefit statement, that's the CEM 2501. The contractor subcontractor weekly certified payroll, that's the CEM 2502. That's the form I was talking about that we need in replacement of the owner operator listing. The statement of compliance, that's a CEM 2503, and then the driver certified timesheets. That's specific to ready mix cement delivery. Contractors may use their own forms. However, they must contain all required labor code elements and information required on Caltrans forms. So this is something that we see a lot. Contractors will submit their own forms, and that's totally fine. If you're using a payroll company or a third-party company that provides your payroll for you, it just has to have all the elements that we require on our forms. So it's important that you're comparing the two. Otherwise, it could be rejected by us, and we'll follow up with you and ask. Due to all payroll required documents are due to Caltrans labor compliance by the 15th of the month for the work performed during the previous month. So if you performed work in January, you want to make sure you're submitting those forms by February 15th. So the prevailing wage requirement statement of compliance. The statement of compliance is a form that must be submitted weekly, and it's not considered certified without all of these items included. It must include all the language on RCM 2503 form, and it has to be signed under penalty of perjury. This is very common. I reject a ton of statement of compliances because it doesn't say penalty of perjury. There's a lot of forms that are used by contracted companies that don't have that language. So something that's common is we would reject it and just require that you re-sign it and write penalty of perjury on it, but that's required to be there. It also has to have the first and last day of the pay period, and it has to correspond to the dates on the weekly certified payroll record. And it should include any explanation for an other deduction. So if you're deducting for child support or taxes, something like that, you need to make sure there's an explanation provided. This is an example of our statement of compliance. There's a nice red arrow though there pointing at I do certify under penalty of perjury because it's very important that's included. And this just shows you all the sections that need to be completed. This is available on the Caltrans website. Fringe benefits, so much fun. Everybody loves fringe benefits. So the contractor's completed fringe benefits statement is submitted to receive credit for benefits in which they pay directly to a third-party trust, fund, or program that benefits the employee. Again, these fringe benefits can be paid directly to the employee if you're not a union contractor, except for the training fees. The form must be submitted with the first payroll and if and when fringe benefit amounts or subsistence amounts change. So we don't need this every week. We only need it the first time you submit a payroll and then anytime there might be changes. The form must reflect the hourly amount to be credited towards the employee's hourly pay. It must include the name and address of where the fringe benefits are being paid. It must be signed under penalty of perjury. And it must include the Department of Industrial Relations registration number for the contractor, subcontractor, or owner operator. So I spoke about this earlier. Labor code requires that everybody that works on public works, contractor, subcontractor, owner operator, are registered with DIR. So that number needs to be on the fringe benefits form. This form must be submitted even if the contractor is paying all fringes in cash to employees and should reflect that information. So in the section where it says, where are you paying this, you would just put cash to employee or paid to employee. So this shows just in more detail where to put that public works registration number. If you're using your own form, make sure there's a section for that. And then below it shows where you're going to input the fringe benefit amounts, the classification that it's for, and then where it says name and address of plan, that's where we want to see where you're paying it to. So if it's a fund, you're going to put that information there. If it's to the employee, you're going to put that information there. And then you can see in that middle section, apprentice or training fees. This is what I was talking about earlier. Even if you pay all those fringes to the employees, we need to see if it's apprenticeable that those training fees are going to the CAC or to a union. So that needs to be completed on this form. Apprentice requirements. You need to make sure that you're submitting contract award information for each craft required on the project using the DAS 140 form. If you are approved to train apprentices, you must send the contract award information to your apprenticeship committee. If you are not approved to train apprentices, you must send the DAS to all apprenticeship committees that can supply apprentices to the site of the public works project. So this needs to be done for any classification that you're using on the job site. If you're using a laborer and a teamster and an operating engineer, you're going to complete this form for each of those classifications. You have to make training fund contributions established in the prevailing wage rate, either to the applicable apprenticeship committee or the California Apprenticeship Council. You need to contact the applicable apprenticeship committee to request apprentices for each craft or trade on your project using the DAS 142 form. The form must be submitted at least 3 business days or apprentices are required. You have to employ apprentices in the correct ratio.
So we just have one question from Cameron Williams. And they say, I employ, I believe that's what he meant to say, biologists and archaeologists for environmental compliance. My understanding is there are no prevailing wage rates for that or requirements for me to certify payroll. Is that right?
It's sort of right. So in most cases, inspectors, if they're not performing physical work, I'm not going to make a blanket statement here. In most cases, they're not covered, but in some cases they are, and they do require payment of prevailing wage. It really depends on the type of work that's being performed at the job site. But in most cases that isn't covered work. There is a classification, and I believe it's building inspector testing, that does have some groups in it that have testing. Scope of work includes testing and things like that, biological testing. But in most cases that won't be covered work. If you ever have questions about what is covered or not covered when you're performing that type of work, definitely reach out to us, because there are cases where it can be. So it varies. So sorry, I can't give you a clear answer on that one. Okay. Oh, LCP Tracker. So LCP Tracker is a third-party web-based software program that allows contractors to submit all required labor compliance documents through their easy-to-use program. The software is free to use and they offer free training. The utilization of LCP Tracker will be a requirement on some construction contracts and is included in the standard specifications if required. If a contract requires LCP Tracker, no paper payrolls will be accepted on the contract. So starting in October of this year, we added the LCP Tracker requirement to the standard specifications on almost all newly advertised projects that were just construction projects. So this excludes emergencies and minor Bs. But LCP Tracker is something that we're rolling out. We're trying to get it, statewide. It's an awesome program. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but it will really alleviate a lot of the workload as far as dealing with the paper aspect of everything. So we're trying to go digital. Everybody's working from home. So this is something new that we're implementing. And if you ever have issues or problems using it, reach out to your labor compliance officer. LCP Tracker has great support as well. And that information is on their website, so you can reach out to them directly. But this is a new thing that we're doing. So it's fun and we're all learning together. So if you ever need help, just please reach out to us. So this is all the resources that are available. We have the Caltrans Labor Compliance website, the link for the prevailing wage determinations, the DLSC Public Works Manual. That manual is awesome. It's extremely helpful. It has a lot of examples for specific situations that you might run into. There's also the DIR Apprentice requirements, the Caltrans standard specifications, the DIR Public Works Manual, which is on there twice, the federal wage determinations. So these are really good resources. These are good places to look. If you can't find something you're looking for, definitely reach out to us and we'll do our best. If I do have apprentices, do I always have to send out a DAS 142? Yes, we send out the DAS 142. Those are required forms. And you're going to want to make sure you keep copies and proof that those were sent. Any other questions? I know that was a ton of information. I'm excited to hear that they're going to do a whole day of labor compliance in April. That'll be awesome. Hopefully they'll go into more detail. So
Dava mentioned LCP Tracker and we are going live. We are excited about that program. It is free to use. It has great support and it's a little bit of work going up front, but once you get your account set up and you get your employees entered, I think you're gonna like it. We've gotten very good feedback on that program and we're very happy to be rolling that out. And Dava touched about federal wages and said that they are included in the project. Those you'll be able to find on the contractor's corner. When you click on the projects under the special provisions, it will have those included in there. And again, Dava stressed about DIR determinations, arbitration. I cannot tell you enough to make sure that you're registered. DIR registration is good for all public work projects, not just this project specific. We do know that DIR is doing enforcement on that. That is not a Caltrans enforcement, that is a DIR enforcement. And there are strict penalties for us if we allow contractors to work on the projects without the registration. So you will hear a lot from us from that. And then Bob talked and Dava talked a little bit about what happens if we miss wage increases or if there's the DIR sets the penalties for these. And like Dava says, we will, if we're not getting cooperation and we're not seeing that progress is being made. We have an obligation to elevate this up. It goes through headquarters, over to DIR, through the hearing officer, and they will enforce penalties, and the penalties are pretty strict. They start at $40 per day per employee and can go up to $200 per day per employee. So it is, and then if you go to hearing, you are also subject to liquidated damages, which is the amount equal to the amount is due. In addition, if you are the prime contractor on this, and this was one of your subcontractors, you are jointly responsible for the payment of the wages and the penalties unless you've met certain requirements of DIR. So prevailing wage is something that needs to be taken very seriously. Realize that prevailing wage is a requirement of all contractors working on the public work projects. Dava did a great job on presenting, and thank you, Dava. One of the things that we are labor compliance, and labor compliance is built on rules, regulations, and statutes. And there is a lot of information in there. But just because we are labor compliance doesn't mean that we're not friendly. We're here to help you through this process. We want this experience working on a Caltrans to be pleasant. We want you to come back and participate more on our projects. So let's talk before we have to elevate it up. Let's have these conversations. We have a lot of information, and if we can meet with you and drill down and take some of the anxiety away from you, then that's what we need to do. So
we have one last question. It's a follow-up question from Zucchi Trucking. And they just asked to clarify, the CEM 2502 has to be accompanied by a signed statement if compliance. The one page on its own isn't sufficient.
Yes, we always have to have a statement of compliance submitted with a payroll, because that's certifying that everything on that payroll is true and accurate under penalty of perjury. So yes, that is a required document to be submitted with your payroll.
Camillo and Dava, thank you very much for your commitment and help in delivering a boot camp topic. It's pretty in-depth and pretty confusing at times. And you guys bring a lot of clarity to it. And I want to mention again, coming up in April, we are having our labor compliance. It's a 2-day event, correct, Jess? Yeah, a 2-day event. So we want you to sign up for that. We want you to be involved. Oh, thank you very much for that. It's right there in the chat. So Jada posted that there for you. We have the registration ready to go right now. And if you click that registration link there, that will take you to the for your opportunity to sign up for that 8-hour overview of labor compliance and certified payroll. Very good stuff. So thank you guys very much for your time today. We really appreciate your participation. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to any of your small business liaisons, and we can put you in touch with anybody in labor compliance if you don't have their contact already. We're here to help. We want to help smooth the road, no pun intended, to success, and make sure that you guys are being successful with your contracting opportunities.